He's done it.
Yeah.
He's done. Okay, right. Welcome to the Scrutiny Board, Environment, Housing and Communities for November. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's meeting. My name is Councillor Barry Anderson. I represent Adlan Wharfdale Ward and I chair this particular Scrutiny Board. This meeting is being webcast on the Council's website so that any interested members of the public that are unable to observe in person can still observe remotely. So welcome to anyone who is listening in today. I mean, today's subject on housing is one that affects every single ward in the city, so it is of interest. What I'm going to do now is go around left to right and ask everyone to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, Natasha Prosser, Clerk to the Board.
Morning everybody, Councillor Pauline Graham, Crossgates and Winmore Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Javid Akhtar, Councillor for Little London and Woodhouse, and it's great to see some young people joining us this morning. I take it they're doing politics. Yeah, it's good to see them. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Councillor David Jenkins from Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Morning everyone, Lou Cunningham, Armley Ward.
Good morning, Councillor John Tudor, also from Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Morning everyone, I'm Councillor Annie Maloney from Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Kaylee Brooks from Little London and Woodhouse Ward, same as my colleague Councillor Akhtar.
Hi, Mandy Sawyer, Head of Service covering Housing Management and Neighbourhood Services in Housing Leeds.
Good morning everyone, Gerard Tinsdale, Chief Officer Housing.
Good morning, Adam Crampton, Head of Property Management, Housing.
Good morning, Councillor Paul Wadsworth, representing Guardian Road and Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Trish Smith, I represent Pudgy Ward.
Morning, Councillor Ed Carlisle for Hunslet and Riverside.
Becky Atherton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
Okay. Right, and so can I now welcome formally the young people who are in the audience. They are journalism master students from Leeds Beckett University who are observing today's meeting, and their lecturer, Carmen Brugman. What I've said is if this particular meeting finishes quicker than 2 hours, what we'll do is we will invite the students, if they've got any questions of any member who wants to remain behind, as to why did we argue a particular point, what was the logic behind it, what were we trying to do, and why did we feel that we needed to question it. So it's a way of getting interaction as well. That's if it takes 2 hours, then we won't be going down that particular route. So Mr. Rogers, do you want to introduce yourself?
Morning, everybody. Sorry I'm late. James Rogers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
Thank you. Okay, so Tash, can I ask you to run through first 5 items?
Thanks, Chair. Agenda item 1, there's no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there's no exempt items from the press and the public. Agenda item 3, I'm not aware of any late items of business. Agenda item 4, can members declare any interest? Apologies from Councillors Walshaw and Leigh. Councillor Jenkins is here as a sub for Councillor Walshaw.
Thank you. And can I welcome Councillor Jenkins, who I think makes often guest appearances on this particular Scrutiny Board. So he does know what we're up to. So it's not as if he's new to this board. We do often have him. So item 6 is the minutes. Are we happy that the minutes are a record of the last meeting? Yep, good, thank you. Now, the only bit of information I want to add to here is minute 30. We have advised the chair of the relevant Scrutiny Board but our concerns regarding equal employment and skills opportunities for young people in the city and the persistent inequality of opportunity across the wards. And the Investment Scrutiny Board are going to be discussing this in February 2023 as part of their discussion on inclusive growth. Are there any other matters arising? No. Right. In that case, we'll move over to today's item, which is housing activity in Leeds. Now, is Councillor Rafiq on his way, as far as we know? Nobody knows. Okay, well, we'll let him go as it. So, in that case, Gerard, can I ask you to briefly introduce the paper, and then if either Mandy or Adam have anything they want to add, we can do. Otherwise, we'll go into questions. If Councillor Rafiq turns up, I will then give him the opportunity to say anything he would like about housing in general. So, Gerard Tinsdale, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just quickly go through some of the salient points in the paper. Mandy and Adam will just cover some of the legislation changes that we're focusing on in the service, and then obviously happy to take questions. So I think the first thing on the paper is around rent collection. And I think it's fair to say we have seen some challenges in terms of rent collection performance over the last year. That said, we're still strong in terms of our collection performance. So we're around about 94%, which is not dissimilar to other core cities. And I think one of the things that we suspect, and this is difficult to pin it down, but I think it would be fair to say the cost of living crisis that's facing everybody throughout the country is probably having an impact on that. So given these pressures, we're focusing our efforts particularly on supporting our tenants that are struggling to pay the rent. We're open to engage with people and support people, and we're getting lots of communications out to our residents to support that and make sure they do. I think the other side of the coin there is, obviously, if people aren't willing to engage with us and they're not wanting to pay the rent, then obviously we'll consider taking enforcement action against them. I think the other thing to pick out in the paper is voids performance. We have had, just excuse me a minute, can I get a glass of water or something? Do you want me to? Yeah. Sorry, on voids performance, I'm losing my voice. Sorry, I'm going to have a drink of water. Yeah, on voice performance, our target that we've got is to hit 1% across the estate by the end of the financial year. We are doing better in some parts of the city, particularly in the west of the city. We expect we're going to hit that target of 1% by the end of the calendar year. The east and the south of the city, we expect we're going to get to just under 1% by the end of the financial year. I think one of the challenges we've had with voids is obviously there's been a backlog created since COVID, but then we've had the other pressures in terms of being able to get operatives in place to do it. And we've also had some significant challenges in terms of getting supply of materials. Over the last couple of months, though, we have seen a significant reduction in the number of voids across the city. So we're hoping, as long as we can mirror that trend throughout the rest of the year, that we'll hit those targets. In terms of repairs, we're continuing to reduce the backlogs that we've got in the service. And what we are doing is focusing very much on engagement with our tenants. And thank you. One of the things we're doing there is we understand that we're not necessarily going to hit a lot of the repair requests within the agreed timescale. So we've got a team set up that's engaging with the customers to keep them aware of how we're going to support them moving forward. That's very much covers the general repairs. In terms of the emergency repairs and the priority repairs, we're still confident as a service that we'll hit those within the required timescales. I think something else that's happened over the last few months is the demand on the repairs service, and we've seen an increased demand compared to similar periods of time over similar years. And we're referring to that really as the kind of the hidden backlog that's been created through COVID. So when we haven't been as active in picking up repairs, when customers or tenants haven't been as active in terms of reporting those repairs, they're starting to come into the system now. So that's creating just a little bit of a pressure on us. But again, we're confident that we're going to get there. We're bringing other additional resources in where we can to help support people and get those repairs done. I think in terms of our investment strategy, the report highlights some of the really positive work that we're doing in the service, particularly around covering the energy efficiency work that we're doing, improving heating systems in properties and improving insulation in our properties as well. And that, I think, just to highlight, is a real positive for our customers as well. It goes back to my first comments around rents and in particular some of the financial challenges that our tenants have got. And obviously, if we can better insulate their properties and we can improve the energy systems they've got, well, that's going to reduce their bills for them. I'm not going to say it's easy for them to pay, but it'll certainly help. Another thing in the paper is the work that we've been doing around some of our high-rise blocks. That went to the last executive board. It covers the Alton blocks and the Gipton Gate blocks. That's 5 in total. And we made a decision through exec board, with the support of exec board, that it will be better to remove those blocks out of the service and redevelop them. Thankfully, that was agreed. So we're now working with the residents to move them out. We suspect that will take us a couple of years, and then that will give us the opportunity to build much better quality homes, again, that are much more energy efficient and better for our customers. I couldn't come here today, I don't think, and not pick up on the pressures that we do have around trying to support people that are facing homelessness. The supply and demand issues across social housing in Leeds, not dissimilar to the rest of the country. We're getting less properties coming empty. People are choosing to stay longer in our properties. Obviously, we lose a certain amount of our stock each year through the right to buy. That's circa 600 properties at the moment. I'm making an assumption with everything that's going on that hopefully that will reduce over the next few years, but we'll have to see on that. Our waiting lists still remain relatively high. We've got about 26,000 on the housing register. We have done some good work in trying to support people that have been given Band A, the highest priority we give anybody, on our housing register for properties. I think the last time I came, I quoted a figure of just over 6,000. We've got that down to under 6,000 now, but that's still a significant amount of people that wanted to be rehoused in Leeds. And the average time to rehouse people now, even with Band A, is round about 2 years. Some parts of the city, it will be significantly more than that, and in other parts of the city, slightly less. I think the other thing that we do really well in Leeds, and I think it's worth mentioning, is the work we do in terms of supporting people that approach us when they are threatened with homelessness. And we help about 80% of people and stop them becoming homeless when they engage with us. Now, that 80% figure might not sound too high, and obviously we'd like it to be higher than that. But when you look at the national average across the country, that figure's around about 50%. So you can see Leeds is doing really well in terms of its preventative approach. I think I'm just going to pause there now, and I'm just going to invite Mandy in, who's just going to pick up some of the legislation changes that we're going to have to be dealing with over the next year.
Okay, so there's a social housing regulation bill that is currently working its way through Parliament, which really sets out the framework for regulation moving forward in the sector and builds on previous indications via the housing green paper, white paper that have come out over the last few years. So we are planning, just to outline some of the key changes in that legislation. There will be an increase in regulation of the social housing sector from April next year. there will be a series of indicators, which will be national indicators, which are outlined in the report, which will be measured of all social housing providers, and comparisons in performance, and then a focus on looking at organisations and what their co-regulatory approach is. So still a focus on that regulation involving tenants and members, but also more scrutiny of that externally. So we are likely to see an increase in inspections of social housing providers. So there's lots of work that's happening to prepare for that, in terms of ensuring that we're able to report the TSM's tenant satisfaction measures by April next year. We've resumed our tenant survey to start to gather the tenant satisfaction elements of some of those measures. And then also there's a big focus through the regulatory approach on complaints. So the Housing Ombudsman published a complaints handling code last year, which put additional responsibilities on housing providers, but also set some standards and expectations of how we manage complaints. So there's been a lot of work that's been done over the last 12 months to strengthen our approach on complaints handling. I suppose the other element to the regulatory approach is the consumer standards. So there are currently 4 standards that are very high level, but they set the expectation of how social housing providers should manage tenancy management services, lettings, repair services, etc. And in anticipation of the change of approach, we're undertaking a self-assessment against those standards at the moment to ensure that we're robustly complying with those standards and identifying areas for improvement. Okay.
Thanks, Mandy. Chair, if it's okay, I'll just bring Adam in just to cover some of the updates around the Building Safety Act changes.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, there's a high-level summary in the report, but just wanted to provide a little bit more background detail around the Building Safety Act. So the Building Safety Bill was introduced, was announced in 2021. It is, of course, a direct response to the Grenfell tragedy and the subsequent independent review of building and fire safety regulations completed by Dame Judith Hackett. The bill became an act following royal assent in April of this year, and its implementation is then being phased in between April of this year and October 2023. Its purpose is to put in place new and enhanced regulatory regimes for building safety and construction products, and is to ensure that residents have a much clearer and stronger voice in the system when it comes to elements around building safety. The Act is generally recognised as the most fundamental reform across construction and residential property sectors in several decades, and will have a fundamental impact on the way that we manage, maintain and invest in both new and existing high-rise buildings, with, like I say, that much greater emphasis on the voice of those who live and work in affected buildings. The Act applies to buildings over 18 metres or 7 storeys, as I'm sure you're aware, and although the scope of the Act could be extended in the future, for Housing Leeds, that currently means 118 buildings within scope, which accounts for about 7,000 homes. So really significant as far as we're concerned. The Act will be enforced by a new regulator, a role to which the Health and Safety Executive has been appointed. This does represent a new role for the HSE, so its approach to regulating the Act is still in development, and there's a lot of ongoing conversations taking place between stakeholders there, but early indications do imply that it's going to be a real collaborative approach, certainly in the early stages of the Act, until we get to that steady state, which is really encouraging. A lot of really positive engagement going on between all stakeholders. From an enforcement perspective, non-compliance with the Act is, of course, extremely severe, and can range from sanctions including unlimited fines, enforcement action, and ultimately custodial sentences for accountable people. The Building Safety Act has adopted a gateway system to ensure that building safety risks are considered at each stage of a building's life cycle, everything from conception, planning, through to management and demolition. So Gateway 1 covers that planning stage. Gateway 2 is to ensure that building safety regulator is satisfied with the building's design, and then through to Gateway 3, which is about the ongoing maintenance and management of a building through to demolition. And throughout all the gateways is what's referred to as a golden thread to ensure that accurate, up-to-date information is available to the right people at the right time and is updated throughout the life cycle of that building. In addition, there's what's called mandatory occurrence reporting. So that's things like our compliance reporting. Any defects are reported through to the housing regulator on a periodic basis. A lot of this kind of information is things that we already produce, but making sure that's put in the right place at the right time and available to the right people. So again, a really important measure for us, because I think, again, from a Housing Leeds perspective, as members will be all too aware, fire safety has been a huge focus for us pre-Grenfell, but even more so post-Grenfell. So getting that information in one place available to everyone is really key. And of course, from a Housing Leeds perspective, Gateway 3 has been a real focus for us, that ongoing management and maintenance of existing buildings. Like I say, 118 blocks within scope, just over 7,000 homes. So we have now a well-established project in place where we're managing our approach and our requirements and the development of the requirements, looking at things like roles and responsibilities. It's going to have an impact on all parts of our service, from people going into repair buildings, communal areas, the management of the housing management elements, the investment in our stock, and of course, like I say, our ongoing maintenance around compliance. So looking at roles and responsibilities, including those regulatory requirements to appoint accountable people. We're also looking. A big part of this is what's referred to as building safety cases. That's an enhanced version of a fire risk assessment, essentially, making sure that we have a bespoke document, a live document in place for each building, looking at things like fire risk assessment, evacuation plans, technical information, engagement plans. And resident engagement, like I say, is a key element of the bill. So again, one of the core functions of our project moving forward is developing those bespoke engagement plans with each of the affected buildings. And as I previously mentioned, the golden thread as well, looking at the management of information around the buildings. As far as progress is concerned, we're comfortable that we're well on track to meet the requirements in advance of the implementation of some of those Gateway 3 requirements. We are aiming to be in steady state for October 23, rather than kind of just meeting that deadline. And like I say, we're comfortable that progress is being made around that. It is a huge change for us. A lot of process changes, a lot of policy changes associated with it. But like I say, we're comfortable with progress, albeit a lot of work still to do, Chair.
No, I think that covers the main detail in the report, Chair.
Pete, do you want to introduce yourself and then make any introductory remarks you would like?
Thanks. Apologies for the slight delay. No, Hamid Rafiq, I'm the Exec Board Member for Housing and Environment, and I think the colleagues have kind of highlighted some of the current challenges, and the report clearly encapsulates some of the challenges facing the service, but also I think spells out where we do really well as a service, and probably ahead of the curve if we compare to some of our peers nationally. So I'm happy to take any comments or questions from colleagues.
Questions? Councillor Cunningham.
Chair, I've got quite a few questions. How do you want me to do it? All of them at once?
Fire away, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that report. So I'll just run through my general queries. I appreciate some of these may not be things that you can answer within the meeting, but would be information that I would like to have knowledge of. I'd be interested to know the amount of cases that do end up having to go and be referred to debt collection agencies within our rent collection, and how many result in bailiff action as well. Just going on a number of residents in my ward who have contacted me with those concerns and worries. In terms of the voids performance, I'd be interested in some background data on kind of timescales and costings, particularly in different areas of the city. So linking in with that, a slight concern over the streamlining of the annual home visits, where I think some general repairs may well get picked up. So if I give an example, if I may see a family move into a property, then become an overcrowding case, so move on, and I see that maybe that property has really declined within the space of 2 or 3 years. It hasn't had that ongoing maintenance. So, and that surely increases the amount of time that property is in void. So I'm just interested in those kind of disparities between ongoing maintenance and the length of time zone that properties are in void around the city. And also, just to ask, in terms of homelessness, are you differentiating between homelessness and people who are rough sleeping, or are you using the term homeless here as people who are at threat of losing a tenancy? Thank you.
A lot of questions there. The debt collection numbers, rather than try and ask my colleagues to see if we can guess off the top of his heads, we'll provide those details for you in terms of numbers of people that we're taking action on. In terms of homelessness, we tend to refer to people either homeless or threatened with homelessness when we're going through a lot of our performance stats. We do have a breakdown in terms of those that are roofless or rough sleeping in the city. Rather than be quoted on a number, I will come back to you with that number. It's certainly less than 40. I just cannot remember off the top of my head the exact number. Around contact with our residents, particularly the new annual tenancy contact programme that we've got in place, we used to physically make sure we contacted everybody every year. That now is really over a rolling 3-year programme, but that's not to say that we're not in constant contact with them. We're just not physically going and knocking on the door, but we are still speaking to people, we are still phoning them, and we will still ask them about repairs and give them the opportunity to tell us. We'd much prefer people to let us know if they've got an issue with repairs, rather than just leave it and allow the property to fall into decline, as you mentioned. I'm not sure whether I got your question on the next point on that, but that's if people have left that property and it's a poor level of repair, and then we've got to go in and improve it. If the condition of properties is just through lack of maintenance on our part, then we'll address that. But if there's problems with that property that are caused by the tenant that's left the property in terms of willful damage, then we will look to try and recover those costs. And that's an area of work that we're focusing on right now. In terms of, I think the only other point I missed there was Void's performance, and we can send something over if you want, rather than go through that in detail now, if that's okay, Chair.
Well, I thought you'd have a future. Just on voids, to carry on from Councillor Cummingham's comment about a void. The time for voids, if it's extended, it's lost revenue to you. So, you know, that should be the driver to get the void right. But I think Councillor Cummingham's point was that because you've not been in and done regular maintenance to a property, then that means that property takes longer to be a void. Was that your point? Rather than tenants that have not kept their property up. It's around you not coming in and doing things, which is where I come on to my point regarding responsive repairs or such responsive repairs. It's the coordination of those repairs. I know Councillor Rafiq doesn't like me offloading my casework onto you, but you're going to get an example, whether you like it or not. I have one in my own ward, but I'll use one that's not in my own ward, is where a central heating system's been upgraded through another repair, has caused that to need to be upgraded, and the council have chosen to upgrade it. Then a few months later, leaks are found on the radiators, and because they're getting worse and they've not been detected, I have to say, by the tenant, because she's vulnerable immediately, an emergency repair is called for. The emergency repairer comes out and turns off the radiator, or radiators, 2 of them in actual fact. There were 3 leaks, but 2 of them. He turns them off to stop the leak and says that he will then put in a a regular repair, but the leak is before the radiator. So it doesn't actually, it turns the radiator off and stops the radiator functioning, but it doesn't actually stop the repair, which is important because I'll just come on to that. And then, of course, the regular repair is then ordered. PH Jones come out to do the regular repair and say, oh, it needs a new valve. We didn't know that. But surely the emergency repairer said, you need to do a regular repair for valves. We'll now order some valves. So then a third visit is scheduled for today as it happens, but I've just had a message to say the boiler is not functioning. Well, the boiler won't function because the boiler's losing pressure because of the leaks. And that's happened whilst we've been waiting for the leaks. And I'm just about to send a message back. You'll have to wait till this afternoon till PH Jones come, because they come in between 12 and 6 allegedly to spec the leaks. But it's this lack of coordination between each department or each set of workers that is meaning that we've had 3 visits, which certainly 2 should have been a number of visits. And really, after a recent upgrade, we shouldn't be getting the leaks that we're getting. And it's the timescales and the effect on tenants that I'm really concerned about. Sorry, Chip.
Thank you. Again, a couple of questions there. And I'm going to hand over to Adam in a minute just to pick up on some of the repair issues. In terms of the voids, your first question, you're absolutely right. When a property is empty, we're losing rent on that property. So as I refer to the update I gave around voids earlier, our target is to get our voids back under 1% by the end of the financial year. And we suspect the west of the city that will be done by Christmas, which will increase that revenue stream coming in then in terms of those empty properties and us being able to collect rent from them. I'll let Adam pick up the repairs question, but one of the things we do is we're not just going out and carrying out repairs, we do look at improving our stock, and we try and use a level of intelligence there to look at the types and the number of repairs that are coming into the service, whether we've got a particular issue in an area, and then link that into our capital programme. So we'll cover a lot of properties at once and potentially be able to do that cheaper rather than just going out to add up properties as we referred to. But I think I'll bring Adam in at this point just to see if he can give any more clarity on that.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. And I know the example that you're using is a specific example, but I think it's the kind of example that sorry, I'll be diplomatic. It causes me great frustration because there's no excuse for it. We've done an awful lot of work over a number of years now, central heating being a perfect example of it, about standardising and formalising our assets in these properties, specifically to ensure that we're minimising van stocks, we're minimising the range of products that people need to carry on a daily basis, to ensure that we're not having those repeat visits. So that can be everything from the size of radiators to specific valves to boilers themselves, and obviously all the components within there. And that is illustrative of what we've tried to do across a range of our stock. So it is incredibly frustrating. I think the other focus from us around that particular point and repeat visits and wasted visits, obviously there's the impact on the customer, and we need to make sure that customer service is our focus. Equally, we're talking the report with Gerard and I have talked just in our brief updates here about the pressure that's on the service in terms of backlogs. We can't afford wasted visits at the moment. We need to make sure that every visit is as efficiently delivered as we possibly can, not only for that customer service perspective, but to ensure that we're working our way through our backlogs in as efficient a manner as we can. I'd really like, Councillor, if you don't mind, to get some of those specific examples from you so we can look into them, because I do find it immensely frustrating, as I'm sure you do, and of course our customers do, and it is things that we need to learn from. Again, Gerard mentioned that we do have our intervention team whose specific role is to look at learning from these cases. And we do an awful lot of work around that. Speaking to my colleagues at both Mears and Leeds Building Services, who we meet on a weekly basis, and we do go through specific examples to make sure that we can learn from them. So I'd be delighted to get that detail from you, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Councillor Asghar Khan. I'm Councillor for Burma Tosson, Richmond Hill Ward. Please accept my apologies for late. And it's nice to see all of you here. Thank you, and it's excellent report, and and it's good to see you, Gerald and Adam, as well. This morning, my question is just follow on from my colleagues about the void properties. Please accept my apologies if this question has been asked before. How many void properties do we have across Leeds? What's the time scale those properties to bring back in use? Yeah, then I'll go off some more to follow on if that's okay.
We've currently got round about, is that 3-4?
That's as of.
Oh,
today, yeah.
we've done exceptionally well this week. Last week we were running at 960. We're down to 934. So the voids are coming down better than I actually thought at the beginning of this meeting. So that's good to hear. In terms of timescales, councillor, we would like to turn our void properties round within 30 days. I haven't got the figure in front of me about how long it's taken us currently. It is taking us longer because we've got a backlog within the system, but I would hope by next year, when we reduce that backlog, we'll be back within that target.
Thank you, Chair. To follow on from there, I know last 3 years have been very, very difficult for all of us, and we've got lots of backlog to cover them. What's our capacity? Because when we report to building services, the answer we get is it's lack of staffing, because we are still recruiting the staff. We have not a full capacity. Are we at the full capacity at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I'll pick that up. Certainly from a void perspective, we went through a procurement exercise to introduce some additional capacity for delivering the void works. We're now in about the 8th or 9th month, forgive me for the exact date of those additional contracts. And they're short-term contracts specifically aimed at dealing with this backlog. One of the things that we were really keen on in that procurement exercise was to make sure that we are introducing additional capacity and not kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul from different contracts, different services around the city, but introducing new capacity into the city. Obviously, there's a challenge in doing so in that a lot of our neighbouring authorities are in a not dissimilar position and equally looking for additional capacity. But that's a real positive around the voids numbers, and as Gerard pointed out, it's having a positive impact. Around the repairs, what we are seeing is our existing capacity is able to meet demand. The problem there for us is that we do still have a number of repairs on our backlog. So increasing that capacity, it's very difficult for us to identify that in the market. So what we're looking to do is improve our efficiencies, improve productivity, improve process in order to increase that capacity from a repairs perspective. And again, there's some real positive work taking place there, both again with Mears and Leeds Building Services. But like I said, what we are seeing at the moment is demand just about capacity just meeting demand rather than exceeding it. What we do need to be mindful of when it comes to things like recruitment, particularly through our internal service providers, what we don't want to do is permanently recruit to posts in order to reduce backlogs, only to find ourselves in a position in 6 months' time that we've got too much demand, too much capacity to meet incoming demand, and that obviously therefore creates inefficiency within the system. So our key focus is on engaging our subcontractor networks and making sure that we're balancing that across the city, so we're able to reduce those numbers right across the city.
Do come back again?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Adam, for that. And just briefly, there's nothing in the report under the right to buy properties. How many properties have we sold, and how many properties have we bought back?
I haven't got an exact figure, councillor, but we can certainly get that information for you. We lose roughly 600 properties a year through right to buy. In terms of how many we bought back this year, I'd need to just check with Housing Growth and provide that figure for you, if that's okay. But we are actively looking to try and purchase properties if it's the right thing to do and viable for us to do so, financially viable for us to do so.
So I've got Councillor Smith, then Councillor Carlisle, then Councillor Actor, then Councillor Maloney. So Councillor Smith next, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't hijack the entire meeting, I'll try and group my questions together. So apologies. Last week at the meeting, I threw a few questions at you guys. I don't know whether you've got any answers to those. They were around antisocial behaviour in our properties, drugs, pets, youths, etc. They were around repairs that were reported, but seemingly not picked up. So the residents were coming to elected members to try and resolve them for them. They were around right first time repairs and particularly void properties where residents were moving in and the repairs not done to the correct standard or being done at all. And therefore the resident was disrupted again several times. Planned works, they're too slow and they're not being communicated effectively to residents. I know I've been looking at a particular section of road that's, well, it's little more than a dirt track now. And I've been banging that drum for over 3 years. And that's falling under housing. I had a question about cost of living rate uplifts for our suppliers. And was that, you know, what pressure that was adding to our budgets. I had a question about private sector housing. I've got the PRS sector involved in a particular case in my ward, and I just think it's well, it's just a nonsense, if I'm honest. I can't talk about it here clearly, but I think I have copied you all in. We've got instances of people not living in the property, but it's not being picked up because the annual home visits aren't taking place. So they're being missed. So we've got empty properties that need people living in them. The estate walkabouts, I'm told, are cut down from 4 times a year to 2 times a year. So again, the estates, are they going to be managed effectively? And then I've got an example where I had a vulnerable resident notify me on Saturday that they had an issue. They'd called the emergency helpline and were told to ring back on Monday. Now, I called the emergency helpline. I waited over 30 minutes. I've taken a screenshot of the length of time I waited. It was 32 minutes and some. It was answered. The handler was, quite frankly, disinterested. They told me there were only 3 people on duty to cover the entire city. They were all working from home, and she'd see what she could do, which I don't think is acceptable. You know, our residents deserve a better service than that. Now, one thing I do think I'd like to sort of end on a high for you. I do think that the work you're doing around the ground source heat pumps, the Leeds pipes, the thermal improvements, etc., and the new housing that we're looking at doing and bringing on stream is absolutely fantastic. And I know that you guys do some amazing work, and I know that you're very, very responsive when I personally come to you. However, I just think that we're missing a trick, and it shouldn't get to elected members. You know, we should be treating our residents with the respect that they deserve, getting it right first time, and giving them homes that they are happy and healthy and proud to live in.
Okay, over to you.
So we're aware there's always room for improvement within the service councillor, and there's a couple of issues that you've picked up there that we would like to get better. I'm going to bring Adam in a minute just to pick up on some of the repairs questions that you've asked. I do recall the conversation around antisocial behaviour and drugs, and that's something that as a service we're taking away to consider further in how we can strengthen that tenancy action approach for residents that are particularly using drugs in the property. And we'll link with LASBAT to help us do that. I think just one of the points, or a couple of other points from me, you alluded to people not living in their properties, and if you have cases where you suspect people are in there, then please, anybody, share them with us. We certainly would want to know. We do have a very small tenancy fraud team within the service, when we're aware of people that are either subletting or have abandoned the properties, but not wanting to hand those properties back to us, we will take legal action and recover that property. I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but we can probably share the successes we've had over the last few years in terms of the work and that we do on that. And maybe that's something for us to publicise more freely as well, so people can see we're interested. I'm hearing a common theme around the annual tenancy visits that we used to do and the change to annual tenancy contact that we now do. We did get an awful lot of feedback from residents that felt us contacting them once a year and wanting to go through their home was a little bit intrusive, and we did listen and we did pick up on that from our tenants. But it's just to reassure you that we are still going out there. It's extremely resource intensive. To do it in a year means we're not doing other things that we need to do as a service. But as I said, it's not just those personal visits. We are picking them up through other means now. And we will still address people for the same things. If we need to contact them over a repair inquiry or an arrears call, we'll still check in on them and make sure that their well-being's good. I think the final point was just I was disappointed to hear that we're not keeping residents up to date in terms of our capital programme schemes and our planned works. So I'll address that with the team and maybe pick that up with you separate, councillor, so I can maybe better understand where we feel the services failed there. And on that, I'll just hand over to Adam to pick up some of the repairs issues.
Thank you. I think I'm going to start with the right first time, and I think it goes back to the questions from the previous two members. It's critically important to us from a customer service perspective, from an efficiency perspective, and from a productivity perspective that we achieve right first time wherever possible. And let's be absolutely clear, it's not always possible. We're increasingly seeing more complex repairs taking place, and sort of the scope of those repairs can be slightly wider. An awful lot of work taking place with colleagues who raise repairs, so be that within my own teams at the contact centre, housing management colleagues. Achieving that right first time means getting our original diagnosis right. It means making sure that the right tradespeople are attending that visit, that they're attending with the right equipment, and with the right timescales allotted as well. A conversation with my colleague at Mears last week, where he referred to one example where a bricklayer was expected to go and achieve 6 jobs in a day because they'd all been raised incorrectly, frankly. So a lot of work taking place across the entire spectrum of that process. And again, given the volume of repairs that we do undertake, around about 500 a week, we acknowledge that we can't do those right first time every time, but maximising that is critically important to us. And again, apologies, but back to the point I previously made around making sure that we're learning from those examples where we don't get it right is really important to us, and therefore that feedback is extremely valuable to us as well. I will just pick up on the point that you made around the voids. A real balance to be had with us at the moment. We've talked about the need for us to reduce the number of void properties across the city, both from a financial perspective and from a social responsibility perspective. Again, Gerard provided some of those numbers around the amount of people on the register at the moment. So there's a real balance to be had, but that balance can't be at the expense of us achieving the right quality in those properties. We are aware that we do identify some callbacks specifically around where new tenants have moved into a property and have potentially started stripping wallpaper, and that's resulted in us having to go back and do some plastering works, for example. The alternative to that is the enhanced standard that we did introduce pre-COVID, but we've had to suspend in order to support the backlog reduction. We are really keen to reintroduce that enhanced standard as soon as we possibly can, but that's got to be once we've achieved that 1% target. We do undertake significant post-inspection works, 100% post-inspection works before a void property is handed back. But like I said, I think that's the real pinch point, is that stripping wallpaper that we do see around around once a tenant's already moved in. So we do have the plans to address that, but it's got to be once we've achieved that 1% target.
Just a very quick one, thanks, Chair. Please remember you owe me that data. Thank you.
Not there. I've seen your email this morning, Councillor. Yes.
So we've got Councillor Carlisle, Councillor Actor, and then Councillor Maloney.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to pay credit to Councillor Anderson because I did have questions, but I hadn't indicated, but you read my mind. So you brought me in. So that is Zen chairing. Yeah, so he is reading all of our minds as we speak. So similar to others, I predictably have a list of questions. I wanted to echo what Councillor Smith said about kind of ghost tenants, people who are there but not there. And I mean, just you don't want to go too much on that anecdotes, but I'm aware of one situation, for example, where I think, I don't know, that the individual is kind of there, but is in a relationship actually. So it's essentially at another house 99% of the time. And I wonder, so I don't think it's a malicious thing in that case, but I just wonder if we could incentivize people to move out of properties where really then they're not there, rather than necessarily kind of trying to, because I appreciate it's difficult to really prove that people, or you're really not there. Well, what if somebody's there for a few hours per week or whatever? So I appreciate that's difficult, but I just wonder if there was a role for incentivizing people to just take the plunge and take the step and vacate a given property. I'm really conscious about insulation, of course, and so as we're all aware, so payback on insulation work is kind of that much shorter than it was because fuel bills are so big. So I suppose I wonder what the scope is for us to, as a council, to borrow big or borrow more from central government and just do more of that stuff. And essentially, I don't know what the mechanisms would be, but then can we then kind of almost claw it back from our tenants who'll then have reduced fuel bills? I don't know if it's possible, but I wanted to ask. I'm also aware that I'm sure I'm not the only one of, there's a battle raging in my household at the moment as to whether the heating goes on or not and at what level it is appropriate. But I'm also conscious that lots of houses deteriorate when damp builds up, when people aren't running the heating as they might ordinarily do. So I would just wonder if that's been given any attention, the danger that some of our properties could deteriorate this winter because people will not be turning the heating on much or have particular rooms where the heating's not on at all. Nearly there. So on a few of us were on a Teams meeting last week about housing, and Councillor Ritchie raised some very good comments about I suppose what you potentially call kind of problem tenants who are just really having a big impact on their neighbourhood, and why are housing often slow to act in those cases, and would housing officers be happy to live in that neighbourhood, or would they would they want to see more robust action? Like, I'm aware of cases where there are council tenants who are kind of prolifically dealing drugs and creating lots of issues out of our property, and action seems to be scant. And I suppose then this links to the idea of what is an appropriate level of checks and annual checks or not. And I suppose the thing that strikes me is, if you look at Ofsted, for all their failings, failings aside, Ofsted have a system whereby if a school is seen to be really, really struggling, then they're given a lot more attention. If a school is flourishing, they don't. So if we have, if we've got tenants who are essentially fine and fantastic and been there for years and there's just no issues at all, then just give them a long leash and just don't intrude. But if there are, but then would that then free up resource to then give more attention to tenants who need more support and need more attention? And just to reiterate, I'm not saying we need to wade in and just try to evict people left, right and centre, but just need to give support and if need be, offer challenge. Finally, just to end on a positive, I think it's worth noting. So in my part of the city, we did have one particular housing manager who was in for a while. He's now sadly been promoted because he was too good. And it was just interesting to note the role of a good management. And he knocked heads together and he was can-do and creative, and things really changed and things really shifted, and a whole load of situations that had seemed intractable suddenly were resolved. And I suppose that's worth noting, but wanting to just, I suppose it's a bit of impossible question, but would it just be great to see more of that, because it's, you know, what might seem impossible and intractable isn't always.
Over to you, Jared.
A lot of questions all at once. So I think the first issue you referred to, councillor, was about ghost tenancies and what we can do there. And I think the example you give as well was probably a real world example in terms of people moved in with boyfriend, girlfriend down the road and wanted to hold on to that property. We're aware that happens. There's potentially benefit issues there if somebody's doing that, if they're claiming benefit for a property and they're not residing in there. So we will link with partners to try and persuade people that maybe the right thing to do is to leave that property or to return to that property and stay there. I think one of the challenges for us, we have to demonstrate is that the resident hasn't got any intention to return when we try and seek possession of these properties through the courts. So we do need to gather quite a lot of substantial information before a judge will give us a possession order. And that's why, as I referred to earlier, that's why we've got the tenancy for all team in place now to do just that. They'll do things like checking to see whether any energy is being used at the property, we'll leave tells at the property and so on. But obviously we'll engage with the individual if we know them as well. In terms of incentivizing somebody to give up the property, I've never heard that before, if I'm honest. So we'll take that away and we'll give that some thought. I'm not sure if that's anything that we could do, but we'll certainly think about it. I think the second question you raised was around insulating properties and some of the financial costs that we incur to do that. One of the things that the services has been really strong at over the last couple of years is applying for government grant funding to get that financial support to actually do this. So the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund was successful with a bid, delivered just over £9 million worth of work, I think it was last year. We're just finalising a bid this year for a further just over £9 million worth of work to support us doing that. That grant funding doesn't cover the whole amount, that's match funded. So if the government's giving us 5 million, we need to put another 5 million in as well from our service to do that. But it's certainly money well spent. So it's something that we continue to do. In terms of antisocial behaviour, my housing officers focus very much on the low level issues on our estates, and then we link in with LASBAT to pick up those more serious issues. I know there's lots of work that goes on. It's unfortunate that I haven't got the stats here to share that with you, but it's not just about going for possession orders of properties when people are not behaving. It's looking at other potential sanctions that we can do there to maybe get them to work with us to improve their behaviour and not disrupt the neighbourhood that they're living in. So I'll try and get some stats on that and share that. And then just before I hand over to Adam, I think the final point for me, sorry, there's two of the questions. There was one about having that more focused support for those residents that need it on our estates, and we addressed that a few years ago now, and we've got what we refer to as housing officer support team. It's a small number, about 20 staff that we've got within the service, and we will use those to pick up really detailed issues with some of our residents, something that we know we've got to spend a lot of time on to support those residents, but we know that one of our general housing officers will probably not have the time available to give that dedicated support. And I'm thinking particularly when we've got cases like hoarding in a property, for example, where you really need to work with those residents to improve that behaviour. So we use those to do that. And then the last point was just thank you for your comments about that housing manager. One of the things I do try and push all of my managers to do is to really think out of the box when they've got particular challenges from members that are being escalated, and look at how we can collectively work together to try and find an answer. So it's good to hear that you found that housing manager in particular was doing that, and we'll certainly share that. And I'll just hand you over to Adam for the last bits.
Thank you. It was point really around the cost of living crisis and the impact that that's having on heating in particular. And I think it's a really pertinent one at the moment. A lot of the advice, a lot of the support advice that's out at the moment is a real focus on heating the person and not the environment. Obviously, to save costs makes perfect sense, and from a cost perspective, I guess from my selfish perspective around property maintenance, it's a real risk to us, particularly around damp and mould. And members may have seen on the news last evening a tragic case in a neighbouring authority where the death of a young boy has been linked to severe damp and mould. So it is a topic that we're putting an awful lot of focus on. I think I mentioned at a previous scrutiny board back in October 2022, the Housing Ombudsman released a focus on report specifically focused on damp and mould and improvements across the sector that could be made. We're committed to implementing the recommendations within that report. But subsequent changes over the last year, particularly around the cost of living, make it a real challenge for us. I think our focus at the moment is on our response to instances of damp and mould. So making sure that we've got that comprehensive looking at causation rather than symptom when it comes to cases of damp and mould. So it's easy for us to just go in and do a damp wash, but we might be back there 3-4 months later if we don't treat the symptoms. So really looking at the causation is a focus for us, and making sure that the priority is effective when it comes to responses to damp and mould. We are acutely aware that is likely to increase over the course of the winter, and will be a real challenge for us. But I guess the key to that really is not waiting for that to happen, but trying to put some measures in place now.
Thank you, Chair. Not sure where to start after hearing everyone, but I think I should declare a personal interest on this as well. But let me just make this absolutely clear. The Leeds City Council staff are brilliant. No issue with them. What we've heard this morning, it was all to do with the repairs and everything, but it wasn't to do with anything to do with our staff, but it's the contractors, people like mayors, who are causing problems for our local residents. It's costing us money as a local authority. What we heard this morning, where 1 or 2 visits would have been correct thing to follow rather than having a 3 or 4 visits. Now, who's picking the bill? It's the Leeds City Council who's picking the bill when mayors are going, or PJ, is it John's? John's are visiting. It's costing us money under the circumstances that we're in, having lost 2.2 billion over the last 12 years, and then we're picking up these bills from these private contractors. Now, being an old school person, I remember back in day when we used to have like small businesses where we used to train young people with regards to skills, and then obviously those skills used to enter into the employment. In-house is something I think we should be looking at rather than having mayors, and especially when you have regular meetings with mayors. I'll tell you what, the problem with repairs is mayors, and that will tell all the councils will say that to you and the local residents. So I think that's where the problem is. But with regards to people like yourself and your staff, brilliant. It's not the fault of our call handlers. It's just the people who are trying to deliver the service. They are not doing it to the level. But it's not a question. It's just a comment to say, after hearing everything what the colleagues have just said, it all comes down to our contractors, and those people need to be accountable. And to be honest with you, Chair, I'm surprised why they are not here today, or we should invite them. And I think we've said this previously as well. Why should people like Adam take the headache? And those people who are responsible, they should be here. Simple, straightforward.
The latter point, I think maybe that's something maybe we should hold a working group session with mayors. Well, it only affects those of us who are in the west side of the city. So, but the rest who have building services. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So I think we could look to hold a meeting with them so that we can discuss things in one of our workshop so we can think about that. So you heard it was a comment. Do you want to make any comment on the comment?
I'll start with the positive. We're running satisfaction surveys to get a feel from our tenants how they feel we're working as a service, and we have seen a slight increase in satisfaction levels for both our major contractors, MEARS, and our in-house contractors, LBS. That said, that level of satisfaction is not where we want it to be as a service. So I accept the councillor's comments, and there is still work to do with that contractor to improve things. Adam can come in on the next point if I get this wrong. But in terms of when a contractor's gone out to carry out repair and that repair is not successful and they have to go back out the following day or the day after that to make the job right, they don't get any additional financial benefit from working in that way with us. We pay for that job to be fixed. So if it takes them 2 or 3 times to do it, really the financial pressures on the contractors and not on us, because it doesn't cost us any more.
Okay, thank you. Right. I've Councillor Maloney, Councillor Brooks, Councillor Cann and Councillor Wadsworth. So Councillor Maloney first, please.
Just coming back to void properties, I understand you've got a backlog and a target for them to be turned around, but what is the longest a property is staying void for? Because I've got residents in my ward in Beeston, Holbeck and Cottingley. They're applying for council housing, they're coming to me and they're giving me a list of addresses that have been empty for years. They're saying, you know, I'm on the list and I can see there's this property and this property that's been empty for years. Why can't we move into that one? So really, how long are they staying empty for? And, you know, what do we go back and say? We know they're empty and we know that you're struggling, but we just can't move you in there.
I'd be surprised if any of my properties have been empty for years. We do, I mean, it's difficult sometimes, particularly for people living on our estates, to know what's a council property and what's potentially an owner-occupied property or a private landlord's property. If a property's been empty for a couple of years and it's not one of ours, then I'd expect that issue to be picked up with our private rented sector team to take action against the landlord, assuming it's a landlord, to bring the property back into use. I mean, as I said earlier, we aim to let our properties within 30 days, but I accept that it's taking considerably longer than that while we're working through this backlog. And I am aware of it taking several months for some properties to come back into use, but we're hoping that we will get that back down to 30 days. In terms of liaising with our customers who'd ask about a particular property, if they've been successful, either through a direct let or because they bid on that property, we'd keep them in the loop and we'd give them a rough idea of when we expect that property to come empty so they can move in. Ideally, I'd like to nail it down to a particular day so they know the keys are coming in on that day and they can plan to move well in advance. There's probably a little bit more work for us to do in that area, but I'd like to give people a couple of weeks notice that we know property's coming empty, but we are picking that up with those contractors.
So what is the longest in terms of the backlog? How long are we looking for the longest properties that are void?
I'd have to have a look and see what the longest one is. I honestly don't know off the top of my head. I know it's several months since we've been dealing with COVID. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think first of all, thank you for the report. It's very interesting. And secondly, I'd like to just extend my thanks to all the staff who've worked through obviously the pandemic, but then all of the supply chain issues that came after that and have stuck through that, especially coming up against frustration from that. I mean, I suppose professionally, and then having to convey that, feeling that frustration in yourself, and then getting it back from the customer. So yeah, thank you. I'd like to, I suppose, extend on what my colleague Councillor Akhtar was talking about. We do receive a lot of complaints about MERS. I suppose briefly, how does the void reduction strategy support the sort of long-term commitment to bring all services back into Leeds Building Services across the city? I'll be honest, I do feel like it is a bit of a lost opportunity because, yes, I understand that getting the backlog sorted out is very important, but there could have been alongside using some contractors, there could have been some additional capacity brought in for, is it just about time frames, or you know what I mean? And then there's tower blocks. We receive a lot of complaints about damp and mold in tower blocks, and I'm not sure that MERS are actually tackling the problem properly. I think last of all, local averages for the average waiting list time would be really useful to know across the city as well, for the housing waiting list. I know in my ward it's very popular to live here, so it'd be interesting to see across the city like what waiting time actually is, because I mean, only last night, 9:30, I received a text message from an absolutely desperate constituent who's living in a tower block, 3 kids, 2 bedrooms, and there's damp and mold issues. So what am I supposed to, like, you know, when I'm responding, well, the average wait time is 2 years. I've been waiting for 5, you know what I mean? So thank you, that'd be helpful.
Thanks, councillor. Some good questions. I'm going to refer to Adam in terms of MERS and the question around the length of contract that's remaining there and what we're potentially going to do moving forward. I think one of the things you mentioned, and I appreciate your understanding over the pressures it's caused us as officers since COVID and dealing with the challenges in terms of workforce and materials. But we have brought additional contractors in to try and help us in some areas, particularly the voids. We did have to unfortunately let one of those contractors go relatively early because the level of work they were doing in the voids wasn't at a standard that we felt was suitable for our tenants. And we do have plans when we move into the new year about how we're working with MERS and LBS to support each other to get that backlog reduced. In terms of the waiting times across the city, I can absolutely get that over to you. I mean, one of the things we tell people to do, they can actually see this for themselves. We've got the housing picker online system, so applicants can go on there, they can have a look at properties and it'll give them a rough idea. And I don't dispute the case of somebody saying they've waited 3 years in a high-rise property to move into another 5 years, was it? Depending on the level of priority that case has got, realistically, someone with band B wanting certain parts of the estate and certain particular property types, they may never get an offer of a council property, and that's why we work with people and try and offer other solutions for them where realistically they're probably not going to get social housing stock, and support them within the private rented sector, for example, and help there. I think I'll pause there and I'll just hand over to Adam.
Thanks, Chair. Just on this point, I mean, I often get emails from residents, from colleagues across the council about obviously the waiting register and the times, how desperate people are to move into council property, and that waiting time actually differs from depending on where you want to, some people want to move a particular area of the city where there's actually very few council houses, and that could actually, and they bid for less properties. Others are prepared to go anywhere and could be rehoused within a couple of years. So it depends, you know, where the demand is. Obviously, if let's say Leeds North East, somebody wants to move into, I don't know, in Moortown or in a particular area of my ward, and there's not many council houses, you could be, and they only wait for until those properties become available in certain areas. So you could be waiting for over 3 years or 3.5 years as well. And I've seen as long as that. So where people are prepared to, because of family connections and all that. But nevertheless, I mean, if somebody is actually waiting, and Councillor Brooks, if there are any issues with a property, like you mentioned, damp or any other repairs, then they should be tackled with. There's no ifs and buts, and you know, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing that. And if that's the case, that's the first thing we should be tackling, because nobody, you know, deserves to be living in a property that's not fit for purpose. I'll come back. There are a few other things, but I'll come back on towards the end.
Thank you. I would just like to start by, and I understand that members speak from their own experience within their own constituencies, but some degree of support for mayors. The challenges that mayors face, the issues that mayors face are reflected across the city. We can see that from our performance indicators, and equally, working in partnership with mayors from within my service, working in partnership with LBS from within my service is critical to us improving, making those steps forward. So any failure, any perceived failure as far as mayors is concerned, any perceived failure as far as LBS is concerned, is a failure on the service as a whole, not with those individual components of it. It's vitally important that we get the entirety of that process done correctly, and not just kind of pinpoint specific elements, in my view. So I think it is important that we do look at that entire process, and I do take that entirely personally. I'm here to represent that service, and I'm more than happy to kind of own that and take responsibility for the service as a whole. What I would say is I'd just like to go back on some of the dates. So in terms of the insourcing strategy, we did insource the south of the service in July 2021. And then in October 2021, the new contract with mayors started in the west of the city. So that's for a 5-year period without any option for extension. We are entirely supportive of the LBS growth strategy, and our strategy is that when that contract does reach conclusion, that we will internalise the west of the city on the basis that we can demonstrate that the LBS is meeting, both in terms of performance and cost, the same standards as an external contractor. So entirely supportive, but it can't be at all costs. It needs to be the best value for the customer. It needs to be the best performance for the customer as well. But that's absolutely our strategy at the conclusion of the mayor's contract in the west of the city.
Thank you, Chair. I don't like to see Mandy just being quiet there, Mandy.
Mandy's happy.
I know. Just following Councillor Rafiq, he's touched on it actually. What the question I was going to be asking was the local based choice letting. There are, as you know, the ward I represent, we've got one of the most council properties in Leeds, in my ward. And there are families who are expanding. When they moved into those properties, they might have been in 1 bedroom, but now they need extra and larger properties. And those local based choice letting deprive those communities, those families, because they don't have a connection in those areas. And you have to have a connection. You have to have you have to work in the area. You have to have a family in the area. But some new communities who are coming, who are existing communities as well, don't have a connection, are deprived from those properties, and they don't get the opportunity to move in those areas. So I think we need to really look that avenue again, but in the consultation. But I will be encouraging a lot of residents to do that at that time as well. Okay. The second question is, as this board had the opportunity to visit the Leeds Watch with the chair and the board members, and while we were there, and we talked about the antisocial behaviour and the issues going in our social housing, And I did raise, because in my ward, we've got some new CCTV being installed, but they're not gone live. We've been encouraging residents to report the time and date and location, and when they do report, and then when we find out those CCTVs are not gone live. So it's really bad, actually. So that confidence with the residents, for reporting, it's just going to be wasted, and, not going to be reporting in the future. Can we have the date and, when will they be going live, so we can make sure, update the residents? Yes, your block, the CCTVs are up and running as well, so you can report those. That's one. Just to finish on positive note, Chair, we talked about the insulation. I know in Beaumont, Richmond Hill, we had multi-story blocks being insulated, and this is not coming from me. This is coming from our constituents, my residents, saying, we're living in really difficult times, cost of living, high energies, and those insulation district heating, what they made us, before we used to choose between heating and heating. Now we don't have to choose that, because we don't even put the heating on. It's the houses are so warm, we don't even put heating on. So I just want to say, and what they said to me is, please pass my thanks to Leicester Council and the officers, what they've done for us, and thank you. It's really positive to finish on that.
Mr. Tinsdale.
Thank you, councillor, for those positive comments. Very much appreciated, and we'll make sure the team's aware of that. You mentioned local lettings policies earlier. We have a number of them across the city, and it's one of the things that we're continually looking at refreshing and reviewing and seeing whether or not they're still fit for purpose. But there's other policy changes that we have done, particularly over the last 12 months, to try and ensure the most vulnerable people are rehousing our properties. And I think it probably picks up on a few of the questions that we've already had. I'm just going to bring Mandy in, if that's okay, Chair, just to give a little bit of an update on some of the policy changes we've made this year to support people.
I think because the changes or the increased pressures on council housing stock, the numbers on the register, the numbers in those highest priority, we're constantly discussing, which bits of our lettings policy are fit for purpose, which are the areas that we need to look at. I think Gerard and I spend hours talking about the lettings policy. I think it's fair to say that overall it is fit for purpose, and it is well respected nationally in terms of the approach that we take in Leeds, because it's not just about how we allocate as a landlord, it's then the sort of knock-on consequence that there has potentially on homelessness, temporary accommodation, etc. So our approach to the policy is very rounded to make sure that in doing tweaks that we wouldn't create an unintended consequence elsewhere within I suppose the sector, or the wider housing sector, and meeting housing need. I suppose because of the significant pressures of residents in the highest level of need, we did there are emergency provisions within the lettings policy that should there be an emergency situation that we can respond to that. So you may be aware that earlier this year we did suspend part of our prior allocations that were relating to the date of registration quota. So just very briefly, in terms of our policy, 75% goes to people who are in the highest priority need, and 25% goes to those that have been on the register the longest. Well, obviously, the emergency situation was the number of people in the highest priority. So we did suspend the date of registration quota earlier this year. That was a temporary measure, and we will for 1 year. And we will continue to monitor the numbers of that. As Gerard says, we've seen a slight reduction in the number of people in that very highest priority need. But we're not where we want to be, I suppose. So we will look at that and see if there's further tweaks that then need to be made. I think in relation to the local lettings policies, I think some of those policies work well and others don't. And I think there is a piece of work to look at how we manage those policies and how we adapt them to more recent situations in terms of that housing need, because they were developed a number of years ago, and housing need continually changes within local areas. So it's really important that we do look at that.
Right. Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Maloney was referring in her question to these ghost properties, and you talked about voids. So I think you dodged it, and she's too nice to come back and have a second go. But these ghost properties are in all our wards. I've had one for 9 years, the neighbours tell me, and I can't shift that tenant out of there because she comes back to collect her mail. And so you won't do anything about her. The garden gets untidy, and it's not it's not a young person. It's not sheltered, but it's a bungalow. And the garden gets untidy, and I eventually get environmental services in to cut the garden down, but then it comes back again. And I have to say, I did a street surgery with my new colleague, and the people said, we're fed up of you because you don't do anything, so we're going to try him. But he's had a go and he can't do anything either, because you don't just, I mean, I don't know whether it's a legal thing or a will thing or what, but my major question really was going to be about annual tenancy visits, that you've made them contacts. I think that's where you've really failed, because ultimately you pick up so much on a visit. When I used to hear issues about particular tenants, the first thing I used to do was ring the housing officer up and say, when are they due for an annual visit? Because if they're due, can you go do it? And can you just take a PCSO with you and see what you see when you go in? Because I'm led to believe that the PCSO might be interested. And they used to do that. And we used to pick up all sorts of things. Annual checks used to pick up people who couldn't prove ID that they were tenants. It also used to pick up repairs. I once had the property I'm going to talk to you about afterwards. I had a housing officer go do an annual check there, and the tenant raised repairs with him, and he discounted the repairs, said they shouldn't be done, etc. And I took it up with your predecessor, Mandy, and she was tearing her hair out, saying that's exactly what he should be doing, reporting these repairs, not saying, oh, well, they don't really need doing, or you need to report them separately. He should be picking them up. That's part of the tenancy visit, to pick up a repair. And I think in the present climate, to actually give advice about mold, which a tenant might not report until it was too bad, but they might just say, can you look at the corner of this bedroom? And the officer be able to give a bit of advice or whatever, and insulation and grants that are available and benefits that are available. It's all part of making the tenant more liquid rather than recessive. And I think that contact, I appreciate you had to stop it during COVID, but I just think not starting it is a big, big mistake.
Thanks. I'm going to invite Mandy back in, Chair, to pick up some of the issues around the annual tenancy contact and where we are in terms of performance. Properties being empty 9 years on a estate, that would certainly frustrate me. And if you want to send me details of properties, and that goes out to any other ward member here as well, I'll certainly make sure that the team pick it up and respond back. Sometimes it's not that straightforward to bring an empty property back into use. If it's a council property and it's not being used, it is relatively easy. If it's a private property and I don't know, the owner's died, they've got nobody, no other family that property can pass on to, it can take some considerable time going through the state to try and be able to get to a position where we could potentially even CPO it. I've not got anybody from the private rented sector team with me here today, but I can probably get some information to share just in terms of the successes we do have in terms of bringing empty properties back that are social housing stock. And in terms of our stock, me and Mandy will have a look and see if we can share some figures about the successes that we've had as well. And I think one of the things I'm learning from today is we do need to maybe shout a little bit more about the successes we have in the service as well, to give you all the assurance that we are working in these areas. But at that point, I'll just hand over to Mandy for the tenancy contact.
We have resumed annual tenancy visits. Well, We've received a visit programme. We still keep annual in the title, but we're not visiting annually for all residents. So this year we have a target to visit 44% of our tenants. We have developed that target based on a prioritisation programme. So there are a proportion of tenants who we would wish to visit every year, and they will continue to be visited every year. And those are your vulnerable residents, where there is a history of issues relating to either the property or the tenant. But then everyone else will get a visit once every 3 years. And that is how we've come up with the 44% programme. How we made a decision this year that because of COVID and because of the not crossing the threshold for a couple of years, that vulnerability was the real risk. I'm hearing today that possibly we need to look at additional risk categories. So what might identify someone who's not present within the home, so not ordering repairs, lack of contact, that might be a way of getting across the threshold of some of those properties to understand what some of those issues are. So that's helpful feedback for prioritisation of next year's programme. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got 3 issues, and but first of all, to say I think the council does a fantastic job in all sorts of different ways, dealing with the stacks, with high-rise heating, ground source heating systems, and so on. So the 3 things that I want to raise. One is mutual exchanges. So I've had a few cases of mutual exchanges which go wrong, and it's really upsetting for people because their expectations are raised, and I don't know, sometimes after 2 or 3 months, it all goes wrong and it comes to an end. So I just wondered, hopefully you can produce, I think there is some discussion going on about making the system better and more transparent and more successful, if you like. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about selective licensing. So one of the important things of learning from Hare Hills and Beeston is that it seems to be working, and particularly to protect people in private tenancies. So hopefully it will be extended to Armley in the next year. And is that just a rumour or just a hope? And thirdly, going back to right to buy, when the Chartered Institute did its housing review of 2022, it said right to buy is a strategic disaster. So in Wales and Scotland, they've abandoned the right to buy. I think it is a disaster. It takes away social housing that's desperately needed, and it's not going to get replaced when you lose 600 properties each year. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll happily have a look at any issues regarding mutual exchanges where they've not followed through. I mean, it's one of the issues where we don't really have any discretion as housing officers about whether or not a mutual exchange goes through. The Act's very, very clear in terms of the grounds, and as long as all those grounds are met, that mutual exchange would take place. So, but I'm happy to have a look at those and see. In terms of selective licensing, thank you. I think it is going well in the 2 areas. It's clearly there's been a delay because of COVID in terms of us crossing the thresholds in those properties, but we're getting in there now, and we're providing some really good work. Obviously, we are looking at potentially other areas in the future. I don't think anything's been agreed at this moment in time about a 3rd area, but I know we're certainly looking at an additional area in the not too distant future. I think in terms of right to buy, it's a political debate, Council. It probably wouldn't be fair as me as an officer to give my own personal views on it. I said earlier on today that we lose about 600 properties through right to buy. I think I'll leave it there, Chair.
I didn't mention selective licensing before because I thought maybe it was outside the scope of today, but I welcome the opportunity to just briefly speak about it. So, so selective licensing covers part of my ward in Hunslet and Riverside. I think it has brought some positives. I also think it's really, really patchy. I particularly bring up issues that I brought up before around council properties, but around private land, private properties, where there is incredibly high levels of crime and antisocial behaviour operating out of houses that are in theory licensed. And it seems that selective licensing is doing very, very little to achieve that. And again, I'm not having a get, like I'm in contact with some of the officers and they're great and they're doing the best. I'm not trying to point fingers at anyone, but I just wonder if systemically there is still an issue with selective licensing that we need to look at to make sure that that kind of thing can be really tackled. Because when I saw selective licensing coming in, I thought that would be one of the real positives that it would bring with it. I'd also this is a longer conversation, not for today, but I'd be interested if it is to be extended to other areas. I think it'd be interesting to review just the criminality and antisocial behaviour. It'd be interesting to review it, and I think there would be ways in which you could implement it to make it smarter and less clunky.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, it's the private rented sector that focus on selective licensing within the two areas of the city. Predominantly, we're going in there to check that the property standards meet legislation for the resident that's in there. That's not to say that we won't then address other issues and signposts. So if that resident is suffering from ASB, or it's clear that they're potentially the cause of ASB, there's drug use in the property, there's people in the property that shouldn't be there, we'll link with partners and we'll make sure that that's addressed. And there's been some significant success in terms of us getting into those properties, identifying those things and then referring them on to other agencies. It's not stats that I personally hold, but maybe that might be useful to share those again with you. And if you want to meet me outside of this section with Mark Island, who's the head of the private rented team, who heads up selective licensing, the office there will happily do that and have a better discussion about what we're doing in your area, particularly when you said you felt things were a little bit patchy over there.
What are you going to do about it? And that makes it very, very, if we've got the information, it would help. And the final thing is about visits. I think visits are vitally important just now so that we can explain to some residents who have forgotten how to use their heating and their energy, because it might be a while. I know in my particular ward, you've done fantastic work in the decarbonisation, but some of these people were probably taught back in May, June, July how to use their heating. They probably haven't used it, so they now need to be reminded the most effective and efficient way of using their heating. And at the same time, we can talk about any other issues that they've got about mold, dampness, or etc. Because again, you know, what is the current view about opening your windows? Because some people perceive it that the heating just disappears out the windows. So there's pros and cons. So we need to explain to people about that. So On that basis, I will now invite Councillor Feek to have the last word, and we will then conclude this particular item.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for all the members for your comments and questions. Well, I've sat quietly, but I mean, this is very informative and for me, and we take on your comments and questions very seriously. Certainly I do, and all the officers here do, as we go back to work. No, I've taken note of a few things, and starting with the annual visits, I think Mandy's quite right that we are doing quite a number of visits. 44% is a quite extensive figure. And when we actually look at the visits, or the 44%, we look at the background information, the previous visits as well, the vulnerable, tenants, the areas, and then those numbers are prioritized. So, everybody that should have a visit should have a visit. They should be in that 44%. And it doesn't mean that we don't actually visit. We will be making phone calls to others as well. So everybody gets a contact, but not probably in the first instance or this year, as we go back to after COVID. So the other thing I think Councillor Carline mentioned about borrowing big to invest. Well, we can't borrow from government. We can borrow, but I think the current, if you look at the interest rates, and there are, we can't just go open in the market. We're quite lucky that, some of the borrowing we have at the moment is on a fixed time, but to go out and borrow now, it's not an easy thing to do with the current interest rates. I think the drugs and the criminal behaviour is an interesting one. We are sometimes dependent on our partners as well, the police, LASBAT, and other agencies to combat those. It's not just immune to council properties or areas. It's an area, but we do all we can to kind of tackle those issues. I think sometimes it's important that if you come across any casework, then do pass it, in our direction. Until it's reported, then it's vetted by neighbours or by local people or elected members, or until it's brought to our attention, then we can't do anything about it. So where it is, then we should be. The other thing, I think the ghost properties, I think one of the issues we kind of had in the past, and probably still is people subletting properties, which if we know if they are subletting, if they're not living there, somebody else is living there, then we can take action against that. If so, this is of course council properties, but again, I mean, I think as a service, when we got about 55,000 properties, it's very difficult to kind of be 100% sure if somebody's living there or not. So again, we are dependent on information from, if you find out, but it's to pass it, and then we could look into it and do some investigation. The right to buy, I think, it's a difficult one. And until there is, a change in legislation, whether it's this government or the next government, or we can't, I know it's different in Wales and Scotland, but we are where we are with it, and we have to obviously comply with the legislation. I must admit, I've been on the council, for a while now, and the most, sensitive casework I get is around housing, where people want to get onto the, a social affordable home, into a council home, and we just haven't got enough properties to kind of to give out to everybody that needs one. So it is a difficult one. We have got an ambitious house building program as well, and I think we're kind of second in the country in terms of when it comes to house building, but it's not enough when we lose 600 through right to buy, and then when you've got 5,500 people on Band A or Band A plus, and 2,500 properties become available at any one time or 1 year, then you can imagine that the waiting times will get higher, it won't come down. So And the repairs, I think there are challenges. You know, we talk to our peers, core cities, neighbouring cities, and they have very similar issues, if not worse than us. But that doesn't mean to say that we need to be sitting on our laurels. I think there are some challenges in the labour market because of COVID, people retiring early, whether you're working for council or external contractors. There's left a vacuum in that kind of skills that needed to do the work, but also I think sourcing materials as well. So one of the, you know, when a property becomes empty, then you've got to go out and do all the essential major works. It's not just about pointing paint and just handing over. So, and then one of the delays in the past has been, I'm not sure if it may have still been with some of the materials, is actually sourcing the materials on time as well, and they're not cheap anymore. So I'll just stop there, Chair. Thank you.
In mind that the vast majority of our tenants, you know, everything goes fine for them. They pay their rent on time. We have little or no interaction with them because everything is going smoothly. Unfortunately, there are a number of problems, but they are in the minority. There is no doubt about that. They're in the minority. And so you're to be congratulated for the way that the service is run. Yes, we can all go around here and we can all come up with, but there's a lot of good things that are doing there, and it's seen in the tenant satisfaction rates that you get as well. So that you are seen to be able to do things. You've got lessons to learn, which I think you would acknowledge yourself, but that's the way that we're going forward. So thank you for coming along today, and thank you for your attendance. Item 9 on the agenda, it seems to have disappeared. It's actually item 8. Item 8, Becky, do you want to just briefly go through the work schedule?
Yeah, the main things to note for members on the work schedule are really just the 2 upcoming meetings in December. So members should have received invitations for the remote consultative meeting on Thursday, the 1st of December at 10:30, and also an invitation to a remote budget working group for Monday, the 12th of December.
Okay. All right. So in that case, the next time we will formally meet is Thursday, the 1st of December, and then the next meeting after that is Thursday, the 5th of January. The one on the 1st of December is a remote consultative meeting, so there's no need to physically come into the Civic, so you can do that online. The Thursday, the 5th, I would like you to be physically present. Sorry, Thursday, the 5th of January. Thursday, the 5th of January. Thursday, the 5th of January. I'm just reiterating, just in case people don't turn up. So thank you all very much for your time and effort in being here today. If anybody wants to remain for the next 10 minutes and they've got the time, the students we're going to ask the students what they thought of the meeting and if they have any questions. But if you wish to go, you are welcome to go, because time commitments can sometimes be difficult.